So transboundary environmental governance. This approach has never been more germane, never been more important right now, because everything that we see, all of the issues that we are talking about, all of them are, transcending national boundaries as such. And hence, this approach, this, type of governance is very, very important to bring around in conversations and discussions. So the commodification of nature within an increasingly global system has produced resource connections and flows between places that routinely generate unintended consequences, such as transboundary air and water pollution and extreme weather events linked to anthropogenic climate change. So humans, sometimes what happens that, you burn something in a particular place and, it just flows over to some completely different place, right? We have that thing, I think if you are in Delhi and you would know that I think at the end of the year, I think in last week of December, people in Punjab, Haryana, they burn most of their crops or crop remains or something, and there is this huge air pollution in Delhi at that time. Also, like local people of Delhi, they burn firecrackers because New Year's and Christmas and all of that, that also contributes. But this huge smoke and smog that comes from Punjab, Haryana towards Delhi, it just makes the city a very, very bad place to live. The air quality just plummets down. So that is something you are doing, or you're taking an action at one place and the consequences felt by someone else. So that is where this whole transboundary governance comes into play. This inability of individual jurisdictions, sectors, and groups of resource users to contain and effectively mitigate the cascading effects of human interventions into nature prompts a critical rethinking of the roles of borders in partitioning, fragmenting, and enclosing resources for the conservation or unsustainable development. Scholars and policymakers concerned with addressing these transboundary challenges have paid close attention to the linkages between different scales of border crossing to understand how policy choices can and often do shape spatially and temporally distant socio-ecological outcomes. So cross-border participation in collective environmental stewardship. How are you understanding this cross-border participation, this stakeholder participation that is going on, which is a very important part of understanding transboundary governance? Because who are the stakeholders? Who are the people who are taking part in this transboundary governance? Who is it affecting the most? Are the people who are being affected, duly represented in this particular transboundary policy making or governance mechanism? So broad-based inclusion in decision making about complex environmental issues can improve problem-solving capacities, facilitate the formulation of contextually relevant policy choices, and build political legitimacy around the perceived co-benefits of transboundary agreements and cross-border programs. Notwithstanding these clear advantages, greater participation has also been negatively associated with more veto points, policy blockages, and compromises on strategic environmental objectives, causing operational delays and or more partial implementation of coordinated actions. Too many cooks ruin the broth, right? So transboundary governance, you are going to require multiple stakeholders. You are going to require a lot of actors coming into play here. But what happens is that when you get a lot of actors also, it also, is hampering the decision-making process as well, because all of these actors, they're coming from different backgrounds, coming from different places, and all of them want to put their country, their needs forward, right? When you are trying to build a mechanism of sort of trying to, prevent some conflict, they would want their needs to be fulfilled first. And hence a lot of veto points happen. A lot of policy blockages are going on. Maybe one country is not, at par with what the other countries want. They compromise on environmental objectives. They delay these operations, implementations, right? And implementation is not happening on a full level. It's partially implemented. So moreover, many governments have been slow to integrate inclusivity mechanisms into decision-making institutions and to engage in cross-border activities that risk ceding control over key budgets or forfeiting strategic partnerships linked to competitive funding opportunities. One very big example or reason why countries try to, try to not get into this whole transboundary policy making scenario, because they feel they're going to lose their upper hand, right? They feel they have to, compromise in one way or the other. They're going to lose their upper hand. They have to forfeit their strategic initiatives that they had thought about, So despite all these limitations, the contributors to this collection, this is taken up from an excerpt that I'll be sharing with you once the class ends, and I'll be sharing in the resource section. The recent environmental scholarship and among international development circles that collaborative, inclusive, and coordinated forms of environmental stewardship are not only desirable, but they're also necessary for governing complex environmental issues that exceed the capacities of individual groups and sectors and between different scales. So they, are talking about this thing called participatory paradigm, which is like sustainable development and environmental democracy. And this has been applied to the full spectrum of governmental regimes, including to oversimplify or misrepresent more variegated reality. So it's a paradigm. People are participating in that, but somehow that participation is not doing anything for the people, right? For these reasons, yes, the papers here, what they usually talk about it is they critically, question who is included, who is excluded from this transboundary decision-making policies. How are these countries or these, mechanisms choosing that who can be the stakeholders of that, right? Inclusion, exclusion process. What cross-border programs are given priority, right? Who reaps the benefits of these collective environmental activities? Are people who are being affected, is it just their representatives who are there? Or is it also people who have started, that action which is creating this transboundary issue? Are their representatives also in the decision-making process? And to what extent does participation actually optimize socio-ecological outcomes? How can participation, how can forming such kind of mechanism really help you in your socio-ecological, environmental outcomes? So Young, in one of her papers, she examines the spatial temporal politics involved in negotiating, creating, and contesting spaces for mobilizing transboundary environmental policies. So it's not just people, it's not just that we are selecting these groups of people to represent us, but also this politics revolves around the space. Where are you holding the discussions for these transboundary issues, right? How are you creating such a space for transboundary issues? Because sometimes it happens that because a particular session, a particular thing is happening in one country, and if other countries are in conflict with that country, they try not to attend those, right? And hence they lose out on a lot of different things. So spaces where you are holding these discussions, collaborations is also very important, because that is also politics in a way. She argues that it's important to challenge assumptions about the inherent virtue of public participation. Taking the example of transboundary hydropower governance in Mekong River Basin, she illustrates the tendency among powerful state and private sector actors to deploy claims to social inclusiveness as a means of obtaining legitimacy for less than democratic decision-making processes, alongside mundane state practices that limit opportunities for participation. So she draws from semi-structured interviews and even ethnography conducted in Thailand and Cambodia, and makes a case by comparing and contrasting two types of transboundary environmental publics in the Mekong that entail divergent visions of what public participation means. So here she is using ethnography, which is a very, useful tool or method, you can say, for research. I hope all of you, you are also, going through all of these things. The methods or tools you can use for research. Semi-structured interviews are not, particularly closed, having closed questionnaires and such. They are just structured, semi-structured, so that you can have more open conversations in those also. And ethnography is a type of method where the researcher itself, they go to that place that they are researching. For example, here she went to Mekong, and she was there in the Mekong River Basin for at least a month, 2 months. She stayed with them, lived with them. That is ethnography. Observing people's behaviors by being with them physically throughout for a particular stretch of time. That is how she was able to understand how are people participating in this, how are they interpreting all of these public spaces, scales, or even the fact that public participation is helping these transboundary issues. Addressing questions of scale, Suhardiman and Gehim argue that institutional disjuncture in hydropower decision-making impede meaningful participation in transboundary local governance. Taking the case of Pakbing hydropower dam project in Laos, the authors show how institutional disjuncture constitutes a form of scalar disconnect that limits the ability of grassroots stakeholders to articulate their needs and aspirations for sustainable development through formal channels. Unless efforts are made to overcome such institutional disjuncture, the results from unequal power relations between national government and private sector actors on the one hand, and riparian communities and local governments on the other hand, then the environmental costs of restricted hydropower decision making are likely to continue to accumulate to the detriment of the latter. So what both of these are mostly saying, that the states, the private sectors that you have, that they just they have this tendency to, if you have a conflict going on, they just want to get over with the conflict, right? So they just go, they deploy the mechanism, they deploy their people, and most of the time they fail to take into consideration the the local people that are staying there, the local people who are actually being affected by that. Okay, so when you don't take into account local participation, when you don't take into account local economy, local stakeholders, it becomes very difficult to solve the conflict, because the state thinks they have solved the conflict, but in real, it has actually become worse, because local people now in no way have any idea what's going on or what has been decided for them.